You know that specific feeling of heavy silence that hits you after you've spent a year surrounded by the deafening noise of generators and transport planes, that ringing in your ears that supposedly means you're finally safe? That was the only thing on my mind as I pulled my truck up the gravel road to Oak Ridge, expecting nothing but the wind rustling through the ancient trees on my family's property, the place where I had scattered my late wife Elena's ashes just before I deployed. But as the dust settled and I stepped out, shaking the desert sand off my boots, I wasn't greeted by the solitude of my grandfather's meadow or the sacred ground under the old willow tree. Instead, I was staring down the barrel of three monstrosities, three gleaming, modern farmhouse-style mansions sitting right where my heart was supposed to be buried. I stood there, frozen, my brain trying to reconcile the coordinates I knew by heart with the visual impossibility in front of me, watching strangers sip iced lattes on wraparound porches that were built literally on top of my grief. That's when I saw her, the architect of my nightmare, Karen Sterling, the president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association, rolling down the window of her pristine white G-Wagon, flashing that shark-like, veneered smile that didn't reach her eyes, waving at me like I was a wayward tourist and not the combat veteran whose land she had stolen while he was serving his country. She thought I was just some broken grunt who would never come back, or maybe she thought I'd be too tired to fight. But what Karen didn't know could fill a warehouse, specifically the dusty footlocker my grandfather Silas left me in 1952, containing secrets that were about to turn her little suburban kingdom into a federal crime scene. Let me back up for a second so you understand the stakes here. My name is Elias Thorne, and 3 years ago I lost Elena to a brutal battle with cancer that took everything we had, leaving me with a mountain of medical debt and a silence in the house so loud it felt like it was screaming, which is why I took the contract overseas, thinking that managing logistics in a war zone would be easier than facing an empty kitchen table every morning. My biggest mistake wasn't leaving. It was assuming that the 2.5 acres my grandfather bought with his GI Bill money, a plot of land that had been the Thorne family anchor for 70 years, would be respected by a woman who saw property lines as mere suggestions. Karen Sterling wasn't just a neighbor, she was a predator in high heels, a real estate mogul who had moved into the neighborhood 5 years ago and treated the HOA board like her personal fiefdom, measuring grass height with a ruler and handing out fines like candy on Halloween. She had been eyeing my corner lot for years, calling it undeveloped blight in every meeting minutes, obsessing over the fact that a simple ranch house sat on land worth $500,000 if you chopped it up into subdivisions. While I was dodging incoming fire halfway across the world, Karen launched a domestic offensive that would make a general blush, starting with anonymous complaints to the county about pest harboring in Elena's wildflower garden, followed by emergency HOA meetings scheduled on Tuesday afternoons when working people couldn't defend themselves. She rammed through new bylaws regarding abandoned property faster than a hummingbird's wings, and the kill shot was a $25,000 lien for abatement costs, which was just fancy legal speak for bulldozing my wife's memorial garden and charging me for the privilege. The morning I got back, standing there with jet lag crashing over me like a tidal wave, I realized the survey stakes were telltale signs of a crime, showing that 40 to 60 feet of each of those new mansions were sitting squarely on my dirt. I marched into Karen's office, which was actually a converted guest house that smelled of expensive perfume and rot, where she sat behind a desk that cost more than my truck, sliding a stack of papers toward me with a look of mock sympathy that made my blood boil. "Welcome home, Elias," she purred, tapping a manicured fingernail on the documents. "We handled your little abandonment issue. Everything is perfectly legal. You should honestly thank us because your remaining property value just skyrocketed thanks to the new development." I looked at the papers, spotting the backdated notices and the signatures from inspectors I'd never heard of, and instead of flipping the table, which is what the old me wanted to do, I felt that cold, military calm wash over me, the kind that happens right before you engage a target. "Thank you," I said, voice low. "I'll be sure to express my gratitude properly." And I walked out, leaving her smile to falter for just a fraction of a second. The next day, the legal assault began, a cease and desist letter from her pitbull attorney, Arthur P. Vance, threatening to sue me for harassment if I kept walking my own property line, citing amended covenants that supposedly gave the HOA authority over disputed boundary zones. claiming I was trespassing on my own inheritance. But you don't survive in logistics without knowing how to follow a paper trail. So I spent 3 days in the basement of the county recorder's office, breathing in dust mites and rage, until I found the smoking gun. Every single one of those mansion sales had been brokered by Sterling Elite Realty, Karen's agency, pocketing her a cool $500,000 in commissions, and the building permits, which ignored every setback law in the state, were signed off by Kevin Sterling, her brother-in-law who conveniently worked as a county inspector. I remembered Grandpa Silas telling me once, "Son, when officials start bending rules for family, that's when you know you've got him. Just let them hang themselves with their own rope." So I hired an independent surveyor from 3 counties over to run a new line. The results were a tactical nuke. 0.6 acres of my land were being occupied by foundations, driveways, and septic systems of 3 luxury homes, meaning I technically owned the living rooms where unsuspecting families were watching TV right now. Word spread through Oak Ridge like wildfire, and my neighbor Mrs. Higgins, a sweet 80-year-old woman who baked cookies but kept surveillance notes like a CIA operative, told me she had been documenting Karen's moves for months. Even Frank Miller, the contractor who poured the concrete, confessed to me with shaking hands that he had questioned the lines but was told by Kevin to shut up or lose the contract. The tension broke when Jason, the young tech guy living in the second mansion with his twin daughters, knocked on my door looking like he hadn't slept in a week, holding a letter from his bank. "Our title insurance is freaking out," he stammered, staring at the map I spread on the kitchen table, which showed the property line running straight through his kids' playroom. "My wife is terrified. Elias, we didn't know. We thought we were buying a dream home, not stealing a veteran's land." I poured him a cup of black coffee and looked him in the eye, saying, "You aren't the enemy, Jason, but the woman who sold you this lie is about to find out that she built her castle on a grave, and I'm about to pull the earth out from under it." By the time the emergency HOA meeting rolled around, the atmosphere in the community center was thick enough to choke on, smelling of cheap floor wax and expensive anxiety, with Karen sitting at the head table like a queen presiding over an execution, flanked by her lawyer Arthur P. Vance and her brother-in-law Kevin. She had packed the room with her cronies, the wealthy newcomers who benefited from her selective enforcement, and she wasted no time in launching a character assassination campaign that was honestly breathtaking in its cruelty. "Elias is clearly struggling with readjustment issues," she announced, using a tone of voice usually reserved for toddlers. "His confusion about property lines is a symptom of his trauma, and for the safety of the community, we've had to implement a daily fine of $500 for his harassment of the new homeowners." She was weaponizing my service, painting me as the unhinged, broken veteran to discredit the fact that she was a thief. And when she dropped the bomb that she had already contacted my former employer and the VA to report my instability, the room went deathly silent. My hands were clenched so tight under the table that my knuckles turned white. But I didn't interrupt. I just let her dig the hole deeper and deeper, waiting for the moment to drop the payload. That night, I met with my new attorney, Sophia Cruz, a sharp-witted woman who looked at Karen's legal threats and laughed, pulling a document out of her briefcase that smelled of old paper and victory. "Your grandfather was a genius," Sophia said, pointing to a faded paragraph in the original 1952 deed. "He didn't just buy land, Elias. He bought it under the Veterans Settlement Act, a defunct federal program that came with an ironclad easement clause. No permanent structures within 75 feet of the northern boundary, absolutely no exceptions. And the penalty for violation is federal forfeiture." We did the math right there in the diner, realizing that the daily fines for violating a federal easement, retroactive to the start of construction, amounted to over $3 million, and the meter was still running at $6,000 a day. But Karen wasn't going down without a scorched earth fight, and when she realized legal bullying wouldn't work, she turned to suburban terrorism, starting with a water main break that flooded my basement workshop, destroying family photos and soaking my evidence files. Then came the vandalism, my mailbox smashed by a truck that looked suspiciously like the HOA landscaping crews, and the anonymous reports to the police claiming I was armed and dangerous, resulting in a SWAT team showing up at my door at 3 a.m. The lowest blow, the one that almost broke me, was finding the koi in Elena's pond floating belly up one morning, poisoned, their bright orange scales dull in the murky water, which felt like watching my wife die all over again. I was running on rage and caffeine, barely sleeping, when Mrs. Higgins came over with a digital recorder she had hidden in her apron pocket while watering her hydrangeas near the fence line. "They didn't think I could hear them," she whispered, playing a track that captured Karen's voice crystal clear, stripped of her public sweetness, saying to Kevin, "Just bury him in legal fees until he breaks. Nobody cares about one sad vet when there's millions in property tax at stake. Just make sure the original surveys disappear." That recording was the pivot point, proof of a criminal conspiracy, but the real nuke came from an unexpected ally, Dr. Maya Lin, an environmental engineer brought in by Sophia. Dr. Lin spread geological maps over my kitchen table, tracing a blue line that ran directly under the mansions, explaining, "This isn't just a stream, Elias. It's a federally protected waterway connected to the regional watershed, and building on top of it without Army Corps of Engineers permits isn't just a zoning violation. It's a federal environmental crime." The penalties for that started at $50,000 per day per violation. And suddenly, Karen Sterling wasn't just fighting a neighbor, she was fighting the United States government. We coordinated a three-pronged attack, filing simultaneous complaints with the Army Corps, the FBI for mail fraud, and the VA for civil rights violations, turning her own bureaucracy against her. Jason and the other mansion owners, realizing they were living in illegal structures that were financially toxic, flipped on her, joining our coalition and handing over emails where Karen had explicitly lied about the land rights. The pressure was mounting, and Karen, sensing the walls closing in, made a desperate, fatal error, attempting to destroy the evidence in the most dramatic way possible. It was a Tuesday morning when I woke up to sirens screaming and the smell of smoke, looking out the window to see Karen's HOA office engulfing the dawn sky in flames, a chaotic inferno that she was already blaming on me before the ash even hit the ground. She was on the news, wearing designer pajamas, sobbing about the deranged veteran who had finally snapped and committed arson, trying to frame me for burning down the very documents that proved her guilt. It was a perfect performance, truly Oscar-worthy, except for one catastrophic detail she had overlooked in her panic. I wasn't even in the county. Karen's narrative collapsed faster than the roof of her burning office because at the exact moment the first match was struck, I was 60 miles away at the VA hospital for a mandatory annual checkup, sitting in a waiting room surrounded by cameras, doctors, and federal records that carved my alibi in stone. When Agent Reynolds from the FBI arrived, she wasn't there to arrest me for arson. She was there to serve a warrant on Karen for domestic terrorism, fraud, and arson, after fire marshals found accelerant residue under Karen's perfectly manicured fingernails and security footage of her car purchasing gas cans at 3 a.m. The unstable veteran's story she had meticulously crafted became the noose around her neck, as federal investigators realized she had fabricated psychiatric reports, a felony that carries massive prison time on its own. The house of cards didn't just fall, it disintegrated. Kevin, facing 20 years for conspiracy, squealed on his sister-in-law within an hour of being handcuffed, handing over boxes of forged permits and bribery ledgers that Karen had failed to burn. Arthur P. Vance, realizing his law license was about to be shredded, cut a deal and exposed the entire land grab playbook they had used on 5 other families. The final blow came when the Army Corps of Engineers slapped a $4.2 million penalty on Sterling Elite Realty for the environmental damage to the waterway, seizing her personal assets when the company insurance refused to cover criminal acts. The climax wasn't a shootout, it was a town hall meeting, the annual HOA gathering where Karen was paraded in, not as the president, but as a prisoner in an orange jumpsuit, granted temporary release to witness the dissolution of her board. The room was electric, filled with neighbors who had been fined for hedge heights while she stole millions, and when I took the microphone, the silence was heavy with vindication. I didn't scream, I just looked at her and said, "You thought I was weak because I was grieving, but you forgot that grief is just love with nowhere to go, and I decided to turn mine into justice." Jason stood up next, holding his daughter's hand, and publicly apologized for living on my land, announcing that the families were suing Karen and supporting the demolition of their own homes to restore the watershed. Agent Reynolds took the stage last, reading the federal charges like a grocery list of Karen's sins, and for the first time, I saw the real Karen. Not the shark, but a scared, broken woman realizing that her greed had cost her everything. She was sentenced 6 months later to 4 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $1.8 million in restitution, effectively bankrupting her for life. But here is where it gets complicated, and honestly, where the real story begins. The settlement awarded me over $2 million, more money than my grandfather could have ever dreamed of, but I didn't keep it for sports cars or vacations. I used the money to rebuild, not just my land, but the lives she tried to ruin. I built legitimate, smaller rental homes on the proper survey lines for Jason and the other families so they didn't have to leave the school district, and I established the Thorn Legal Defense Fund to help other veterans fight predatory HOAs. I married Dr. Maya Lynn in the restored meadow 2 years later, right beside the creek that now flows freely with native trout, under the shade of the willow tree where Elena rests. We turned the workshop into a community hub, a place where neighbors talk instead of suing each other. It sounds like a perfect ending, right? The bad guy goes to jail, the hero gets the girl and the money, and the land is healed. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind blows through the valley, I wonder about the nature of what I did. I destroyed a woman's entire life, stripped her of her freedom and her name, and used the full weight of the federal government to crush her. Was it justice, pure and simple, or was it vengeance wearing a legal suit? Does the punishment truly fit the crime when you weaponize the system better than the villain did? I look at my grandfather's purple heart on the mantle, and I think the answer is yes, but I'd love to know what you think. Is there a line between fighting for your rights and destroying your enemy? Or is scorched earth the only way to deal with monsters? Let me know in the comments, because the war might be over, but the debate on how we fight it is just beginning.